Ladies and gentlemen, we are live from the Isle of Man in the UK. This is John and Mike's MMA Corner.
Big John McCarthy, thank you so much for your time today. We'll get things started off right now with saying you have been around the world of MMA from... People won't know it though from UFC 1, but even prior to that, because you were actually training Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, when it was, you know, not really well known in the States, and it wasn't known in the world really. To be fair, how did you, or why did you start Gracie Jiu-Jitsu to start with?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I was on I was working LAPD. I was a police officer, and I was on a martial arts review board because I had done stuff in the past, and they put me on that, and they brought in a bunch of different martial artists, you know, all in Southern California, but all of them are very well known. They had, you know, Gene LaBelle and Benny the Jet Urquidez and the Farbors brothers, and one of the people that was there that I didn't know at the time was Rorion Gracie. And they had a guy that was doing a demonstration, and we were sitting at they had mats out on the ground, but they were sitting at these tables that were kind of formed like a horseshoe. And the guy was kind of he was throwing his student around, his uke around, and I was sitting there with my hand on my cheek, basically, and just looking, and he looked at me and he says, "You don't seem to think this works." And I was, you know, trying to be respectful to him. I said, "No, that's not." I said, "The problem is he's letting you do that." I said, "It's different when someone doesn't want that to happen." I said, "You know, it's a big difference what we deal with." And he says, "Well, would you like to come up here and you know, try?" And I go, "I don't mind stepping up there, but I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to just let you do something, and I'm going to do something back to you." And he says, "That's fine." And my boss at the time was John, and I go, "I'll be good," you know. And you know, I had wrestled my whole life, and I had boxed, and so, you know, he took his stance, and he said, you know, what would you do? I said, "Well, it's different." I said, "I'm the bad guy. You're the police officer. You got to arrest me." And he took a step towards me, and I double-legged him, and I picked him up, and I put him down kind of hard, and I jumped on top of his chest in what we call mountain now. I didn't know at the time. And I, you know, grabbed a hold of his arm, and I hit him a couple times with my open hand. I said, "Now what are you going to do?" And my boss yelled at me, and I got up off of him, and I picked him up, and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry." And I go back to my seat, and Rorion Gracie comes over, and he sits down next to me. And he just starts talking to me. He says, "You know, what do you do?" And I go, "Excuse me?" And I said, "I work here." And that's what I thought he was talking about. And he invited me, you know, to his... he was just going to be opening up his school. He invited me to his garage, invited me to his school, whatever I wanted to go to, for, you know, to see what Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was. And so I was offered, and so I went. And once I went, I fell in love with it, and that was the start.
And I've got to say, that is kind of cool story. I like that. That is a cool story. It's almost like kind of pre-YouTube in the sense of when people go on YouTube nowadays, they'll go, they could like kung fu versus karate, you know, those kind of videos where, and you're kind of in that same circumstance where you're standing and go, that won't work, because if you put someone from a different martial art in, and that's kind of what you see on YouTube. You kind of did it pre-YouTube, which is, I'd love to see.
I don't think there was YouTube at the time. So.
No, there was not. But the thing is, what I found great about reading the book with that Art Davey and Sean Wheelock did, Is It Legal, was the stories in it that people, you know, you wouldn't know unless you read stories. I tell you one that sticks out to me. Do you know what? You'll probably roll your eyes. Maybe was Mr. Art Jimmerson in the back. Is it true where you took him down?
Yeah. Yeah, that was. But that wasn't the night of the show. That was like 2 or 3 days before the actual show. And he had my wife was working for. She was working for Rorion Gracie basically, and she was helping with Kathy Kidd, who was working with Art. And my wife she did all the travel for all the fighters, and she was setting up the party for the after party and working with Rorion's people that was called Jitsu at the time for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And she had this this table, and she was sitting at the table and handing out, tickets for the party and different things for different people that would come up. And I had gotten done working out with Hoyce and had come there, and I'm standing there talking to my wife, and up walks Art Jimmerson, his wife at the time, and Ernest Hart, who was his coach. And he looks at me and he points to me and he says, you're with the guy, you're with my competitor, right? And I go, yeah, right. And he goes, and he starts throwing jabs out, giving a little bit of head movement. He goes, what's he going to do? And he says, how's he going to stop that, right? As he's flicking his jab out, right? And I just looked at him. I said, let me ask you a question. How are you going to stop the clinch? I go, how many times do you clinch in boxing? In a round? 2, 3, 4? I said, you're not even supposed to do it. You don't even want to do it unless you're hurt. So how are you going to keep it from happening when that's all he wants? And he looks at me and he goes, yeah, but movement and stuff like that. I said, what? Well, look at. And there was this open ballroom that was kind of behind where my wife was at. And I said, you want to come here? I said, look, you can hit me with your jab. Go ahead and hit me. I go, and I'll try to get in and get into you and clinch with you and take you down. And if you can hit me, go ahead. But once I get you down, I'll stop, right? And he goes, all right. And so I said, will you tell me when you're ready? And as soon as he goes, yeah, go. And I went, boom, and I shot in underneath him. I picked him up and put him down. And I was mounted on top of him again, and he looks up at me, and he goes, oh, my God, he's going to break my arms and legs, isn't he? and I looked, and I said, that's all you got to do is tap out. And I didn't think anything of it. And when that fight occurred, and he tapped out, and Hoyce was mounted on him, I go, oh, I fucked that up. I really screwed that fight up, man. That was my fault. And Horian was kind of looking at me, and I was kind of acting like, I have no idea, don't know anything, but I knew that was why, he just, he knew he was in trouble. And once he was off his feet, it was like, I don't want to be here. And I don't think he wanted to be there anyway. I think Sean and Art did a good job putting that out in the book, and that was just one of the stories.
Oh, that was what, when I first watched, obviously, UFC 1, then I saw it happen, and I sit there, and even before I read the book, like, literally till the last moment before I read that bit in the book, I would sit there and go, why did he tap so early? And I thought maybe just and that was that you got in his head. We can blame. We need to have the rematch. Bellator need to do the rematch.
See, the referee screwed up the fight even before he was a referee.
Yeah. What was caused the they didn't the little medal, the medallions. The winner got the medal, and you were kind of given the role, so to speak, to look after this. I thought that was a beautiful kind of medal. I loved that, what they did in the first one. That medal was just absolutely beautiful. I wish that they kind of stuck around, if I'm honest. I thought that was awesome what they did. Kind of like the Olympic kind of feel to it with the medal and stuff like that. Did you...
Yeah, that was a one and done.
Yeah. Did you, when you saw it, did you think maybe it'd be nice if that stuck around, or do you think belts kind of... Because of boxing, do you think it kind of suits what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it was at the time. I just thought it was really nicely done. It was an expensive medal, and they had asked me to watch it. And they asked me to watch. I was actually moving around with. If I wasn't training with Hoyce, I was with Horion, kind of being his bodyguard, because there was a lot of people that were angry with him, especially from his family. So he had me around him, but then the night of the show, Art came up and said, I need you to watch this, make sure that you have this with you until the end. And so I said, all right. So, I sat there with that medal in my lap basically the whole time. So, but it was a really nice thing that they did, but they got away from it real fast when all of a sudden they decided belts was the way to go.
So, did you get a feel of how big this was potentially going to be then when you were at the first one, when everything was going around before the first fight? Did you get a sense of anything, or was it not till the first fight happened that you yourself went, yep, this is going to be big?
No, man, I think it was, if you were at the first one, only people there would be able to remember it or know. It was before the fights, there was a lot of posturing, a lot of people, doing things, and even in the back before the first fight, man, there was guys, kicking pads and things, and yelling, especially Pat Smith's, camp. They were yelling all kinds of stuff. But was okay. And oh my God, I've got to go out there. And it was absolutely silent in the back. It went from all of this, hustle and bustle and activity and noise to absolutely dead silent. And it was like, it was the reality check for all of those guys, because a lot of them they weren't even sure that the show was going to go on. They were like hesitant and always questioning, is this really going to occur? And so that fight occurred, and it changed everyone's attitude. It changed the way they were looking at what they were going to do. And the crowd itself, the crowd loved that fight. But when it came to all of a sudden Hoist came out, they kind of liked the Kevin Rozier, Zane Frazier, and then Hoist came out with Jimmerson, and Jimmerson tapped, and they didn't understand that at all, and so they were booing. They didn't like it, and they didn't like the Shamrock versus Pat Smith when Shamrock gets him in a heel hook and eventually taps him out. They didn't like that, didn't understand that, thought it was, bull. And so it was funny that, the crowd themselves, they did not appreciate the grappling at all because they didn't understand it, and that was a normal thing. But I think the overall sense of the show, while you were there, was the crowd didn't enjoy it that much. They were more they wanted to see Rock'em Sock'em Robots. They wanted to see guys standing up and beating the hell out of each other. And when it didn't go that way, they were not very appreciative of the contest.
Yeah, you could see that on the record. You could hear the crowd. You could hear the different kind of atmosphere. You could definitely see a change. I love the fact that I think the commentary was probably the best thing about that whole night. The commentary was just stellar. I think
the commentary was horrible. He had frickin' Superfoot Bill Wallace.
Yeah.
He doesn't even say the name right. He starts it off, "Welcome to the Ultimate Fighting Challenge." And he burps.
Even though there's a massive, huge poster of the name of the event up on the wall, and he still didn't get it right. Just
not at all.
I absolutely made that event, that commentary. It just cracked me up. I was literally rolling when I was listening to it. And even I watch it back every now and then. I actually go back to the first few, if I'm honest, because I got UFC Fight Pass. I am a bit of an addict on it, and I do look back at some of those things because it's just, I love that. I love going back to the first one. Really, the story behind it, how it all happened. The TV deal, Campbell McLaren and Art Davey trying to get that TV deal sorted the last minute. It was just insane. So I was speaking to Campbell about some of the moments he had with Art Davey, before, when they're obviously trying to do the meetings and trying to negotiate and stuff. It's just the fact that it was all last minute. And I said even to Campbell back then, I wish it happened on Halloween, how they were hoping to have it booked, because I think it would have probably just added to the kind of event itself.
Probably would have been better on April Fool's Day.
Yeah, I know. I'll agree with you. Okay, April Fool's, you taught me on that one. I hadn't even thought about that date. That is a good one.
It's so funny that I had no idea that they had not signed the contract for the actual pay-per-view until the day of the show. Because Art lied. He had told me, "Oh yeah, everything's done," and stuff. Had no idea until much later on that they were in this, position where, if you know who Bob Meyerowitz is and the way that he worked, and his brother David being his attorney, he was trying to work it for the best angle that he could, because that's the businessman that he was, and he was, going to get as much as he thought he could out of Art. And Art was trying to hold on to what he had, but Art was sitting there in a very tough position because he had the product, but he had no ability to put the product out there. He had no ability to pay anybody, and so he was in a very hard position. And the fact that it all came off, and it actually came off, as an entertaining entity that people liked, it's pretty amazing. But there was some funny stuff that occurred. That the rules meeting that happened, the night before was just comical, absolutely comedy in motion, because it started off, Horian is trying to be very, correct in what he's saying, and as soon as it started, Zane Frazier started in with, I want to wrap my hands, and you can't wrap. Do you wrap your hands before you're going to fight in the street? This ain't a street fight. And they just started going, and the more it went, started, backing Zane, and Horian was this guy standing on this podium, and he's trying to say no, and it's just getting bad. And Taylor Dooley was the one. He finally, all of a sudden, he just walks up and he slams the paper down because they had given all these guys this paper to sign, and basically it was a release, and it was a release saying, basically if you get hurt or if you die, we're not responsible for it. And none of them wanted to sign it. Taylor Dooley, he slams the paper down, says anybody that wants to party, I'll be there tomorrow night. And they all basically shut up from that moment. They all signed the paper and they all freaking went. So you look, and the guy who lost the first fight, he was the one that really got the thing rolling. So it was, the whole thing was, it was a comedy of errors because no one really knew how to do it. They didn't know how to put it together the proper way. They didn't know exactly what they needed. It was, hey, let's try this, let's try that, and sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't.
The kind of figureheads, apart from the Gracie family, because you obviously had an initial relationship with them prior to all this kind of coming, what was your thoughts then when you initially kind of were integrated with, your Art Davies, your Campbell McLaren, people like that? What was your initial thoughts, obviously, when this was all rumours and talk of happening?
Well, I had met Art, when Art was working with Horion. He had come in trying to talk to Horion about doing a kickboxing show. And then he came back, and he kept coming back, and all of a sudden it was Art was doing marketing for Horion. And, he didn't take classes like the rest of us. We were in big classes, and he was the guy that was always taking the privates. Like, who's this guy taking privates all the time? But he had eventually started coming up, and we started understanding, hey, they were going to do the show. And the show at the time was called War of the Worlds. That's what he was naming. And they came up with this poster. They even had this poster for it, and it had like Roman columns and a couple, like Roman statues of guys, and it was saying that it was going to be in Rio de Janeiro. And we all looked at it that, Rickson was going to be the guy fighting in it because Rickson was the best fighter. He was the best, jiu-jitsu guy there was. He was the guy that none of us could even come close to. And there was no doubt that it would be Rickson. And eventually, things changed. Rickson ended up opening a school in West LA, and that was basically what switched, I think, from Rickson being the guy that was going to be the representative. Horian wanted, his brother who was working with him in Torrance to be the representative, and he was going to give Rickson that, so he took it from Rickson. But, with everything that was going on, I didn't meet Campbell McLaren until basically, we were at Denver, and, I met him, and in my opinion at the time, and it's probably still my opinion to this day, he doesn't know anything about fighting. And I was like, who is this guy? And he was big with, oh, we're going to do this and stuff. And he had no idea about fights, and he was saying stuff, and I'm like, this guy's clueless. But he was the guy that actually, I always hate when they sit there and they talk about co-creator, because they didn't, like, Art Davies is the one that created the UFC. If it wasn't for Art Davies, you think Campbell McLaren would have ever come up with it? Not even close, okay? Campbell was the guy who got it on TV. He was the last straw. Art had gone and tried to get this thing, on Prime Ticket, on HBO, on all these different things that actually had pay-per-view at the time. And Semaphore Entertainment Group was this company that was doing Andrew Dice Clay. They were doing a bunch of different, concerts and all these different musical things, because that was Bob Meyrowitz's background. And they'd only done one sporting event, and that was Jimmy Connors against Martina Navratilova in a tennis match. But Campbell was always looking for new programming that they could actually redo. It wasn't going to be a one and done. And so, because if you have Jimmy Connors against Martina, no one wants to watch it the second time probably. If you get to two, then you're probably not going to get to three.
Yeah.
And they were looking for something that they could have, over. And I'll give Campbell credit. He was at least smart enough to say, I like this. This could work. But to say that Campbell is the co-creator, that's just not true. Okay, there's one creator. He was the person that got it on TV. He's the one that got it on pay-per-view because he talked his boss, Bob Meyerowitz, into doing it. But none of those guys knew anything about fighting, about martial arts, any of it. They were all clueless.
They were the the kind of, like you said, they're the TV link. They're the cog for that piece of the puzzle.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I've said it before. I said, I've said each of them played a part. They were all cogs in a clock. Without one cog, it probably couldn't have worked. It wouldn't have, it wouldn't have happened that night. Everything wouldn't have happened. Everything wouldn't have fell into place if one cog wasn't there. And that's how I look at everyone as. I see them all as cogs more than anything. Obviously, yes, Art Davies is the co-founder. And what's ironic is, he came, like he said in his book, he got taken down by a wrestler when he was a boxer. And I don't
know if any of that really happened. That's his story, and I've heard so many stories from so many different people. And Bob Meyer would start. He came up with after the first show, and then, well, I had this friend, and he did Taekwondo, and his other, I had another friend and did karate. I said, well, who would win? And you listen, and you go, you're so full of shit.
Yeah.
Bullshit. You never thought of that. You never did it. He also said that he could have been the first Jewish heavyweight champion of the world in boxing. Well, I hate to say there was a guy named Max Baer that came along before you. But that's the stories that are out there.
That's the thing. There's going to be stories, and it's crazy how you were involved in the background where people won't realize, but even you're there now. You're there right now. You're still, and you've seen this sport evolve from what it was there to now. And when it obviously kicked all off, when it all started going, your involvement, obviously being the referee, how was your relationship with the fighters then? Because I would imagine it would be a little bit closer than it would be now, because there's less fighters then, there was less events. What was it kind of like? Because obviously the rules were different. It was a different kind of world then.
Oh, it's completely different. And it was, we were the traveling circus. We would, end up coming to a town, and usually it was a smaller town because we were trying to avoid people trying to shut us down. And the fighters themselves were part of, at the time, they weren't making a lot of money. They were there because they loved the martial arts and they loved trying to prove themselves, and it was a completely different world back then. And I used to work out with the fighters, so I used to do all kinds of things that now I don't do any of it because it's a different world and you can't do those things. But it's it's so funny to listen to fighters now that they're clueless as far as how the sport came about. They all think that Dana White's the one that started it. They think that it started with, the original Tough. Well, wasn't it? They did this thing on TV, and that was Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner. No, there's this whole world that a lot of these young fighters, they have no idea, They have no idea what anyone did. They don't know who was responsible for, getting the sport into different levels and different aspects of what made it what it is. And that's okay, but it's so funny to listen to some of the stories that people think are true, that you look and you go, no, that's not what it was, that's not what happened. And I'm one of the guys, I do know. I know what occurred because I was there, and I was there for a lot of things that most people weren't. I was the one going to court. I was the one having meetings with some of these CEOs that were doing things to take away the cable and all these things. So there was a lot that was going on behind the scenes that I was part of that, most people don't know about it, and it really doesn't matter because, in the end, it's just part of that cog, as you said, that ended up making it what it was.
I was going to say, because obviously, your relationship with the fighters, the likes of, I've had Dan Severn on it before, and, I love Dan, he's a top man, and you got, the likes of Ken Shamrock, who, even to this day, still competed, even Hoist Gracie. Your relationship, did it continue outside, like Tank Abbott? He's just, it's Tank Abbott. I hope Tank Abbott's sadly he was meant to face Dan Severn recently on your show, and he had the medical, I don't know what it was medically that came up, but I hope whatever it is, he's got sorted now. It's a good thing that it came up. But did you have a relationship outside of the cage with these guys?
Well, as far as I would do things with them, as far as I would work out with them, I would eat with them. Again, because we were the traveling circus.
Yeah.
But there came a point somewhere. I want to say somewhere around UFC 27 or so that it was like, things are changing. And we'd been, there's a whole theory out there, you know, Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta, when they bought it at UFC 30, you know, their big media push was, you know, they told everyone, oh, we saw this sport, we looked at it as a diamond in the rough, but they were running from regulation, and we decided if we ran towards it, that would be the way to make it, you know, legal and make people understand it. And, you know, it's a great story. It's not true, okay? Because look at the UFC, you know, when you look at when was the UFC first regulated by an athletic commission? It was at UFC 15. It was, you know, the guy who was the one that ended up saying, I'll sanction it, was a guy named Billy Lyons in Mississippi. And from Mississippi to UFC 16 in Louisiana and then into Iowa, all of these states, I was licensed as a referee in that state, and we had to start going and doing things the same as is done today with regulation. And, you know, that ran all the way. The only time it wasn't being regulated is when they would take it to Japan or something like that. So, you know, it got to UFC, I think, 28 we did in New Jersey. You know, it was regulated by the New Jersey State Athletic Commission. And the reason for that, and the reason that they were running towards regulation before Dana and Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta bought it, was that was the way for them to try to survive, because we had been told by people in charge of cable industries. Leo Hendry was the guy in charge of Time Warner at the time, and he had put this thing out saying, look, I need you to be regulated by the athletic commissions. So that's what we started trying to do. And then once we got an athletic commission, we go back and say, that one's not big enough. And then we'd go to the next and the next. And finally, after New Jersey, he goes, you got to get Nevada. Get Nevada. And because he had an agenda, and his agenda was to keep us off.
Yes.
And so all the things that occurred, you know, are there for, you know, people to know if you want to know. But, you know, the relationships with fighters and how it changed, it really changed somewhere, you know, just before, you know, the Fertittas bought the UFC and Zuffa took over. It changed, you know, probably about a year before that.
I was going to say, Mark Ratner came in as well. He's done some great work. He's probably I imagine, is he taking a lot of the work off you then, what you were doing prior when he came along?
Yeah, well, Mark came in, you know, Mark, when Zuffa took over, when Lorenzo and Frank bought the UFC, that was basically 2000, the end of 2000, beginning of 2001. And Mark Ratner was the executive director of Nevada. And he stayed as the executive director of Nevada for several years until they offered him a job, and they were very smart for offering Mark that job. Mark he's looked at as one of the elite regulators of, you know, any athletic commission by everyone. And that's because he's such a good person as far as he's smart, he's very politically smart. He, you know, never gets mad, but he does absolutely let you know when you screw up. And, you know, he was a very big addition for Zuffa in being able to get the sport regulated in all the states that it was at the time not legal in. You know, it was a lot more than just New York. And so there was all of these different, you know, states that Mark started going to, and Mark started doing the work that I was doing before in trying to get people to understand exactly what the sport is, you know, what these guys are doing, that yes, it is a sporting competition. This isn't about anger. It's not about, you know, it's not a street fight. It's not thugs. These are true athletes who are competing, and it's all about competition. And, you know, the reason that we do it this way is, you know, we want you to regulate us because we want you to see exactly what we do, how we do it, and we want you to be in charge of it. So there is no doubt that this is a sanctioned sport with real athletes.
Now, let's then go back to pre-Zuffa, because again, Mark Ratner's done a great job. When you were refereeing the fights, and you took that role on, how much did you kind of know what you were doing when you were starting off, or how much was it?
Zero.
Yeah, was it guesswork when you were doing it?
Well,
ish.
People ask all the time. You know, it's like, well, had you refereed before? know, and neither did anybody else. You know, and so it was the very first fight that happened in UFC 1, Taylor Tooley against Gerard Gordeau. That is what got me the job of being a referee. And what it was is Jorge and Gracie had brought in two, you know, referees from Brazil.
Yeah.
Both of them were black belts under his father in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, whatever you want to say. And it was Elio Vigio and João Barreto. Those were the two guys brought in to be the referees for that first show. And if you watch the first fight with Gerard and Taylor, João Barreto is the referee, and he stops the fight when, you know, Gerard kicks Taylor in the mouth when he's on the ground. His tooth goes flying, and then he lunges in and he hits him with the right hand, breaks his hand, and he cuts Taylor, and João Barreto comes in and stops him. And he was not supposed to do that.
No.
It was supposed to be that the only way the fight stopped was the corner could throw in the towel, or the competitor, the fighter, could tap out. Other than that, you did not stop the fight. And so if you go back and you watch, you'll see this argument between João Barreto and Jorge and Gracie at the cage door. And João Barreto is basically in Portuguese saying, this guy can't fight. And he's right. And what it was is João Barreto had compassion for another human being. But he wasn't supposed to. And so, you know, shortly after that show, Jorge calls me in and says, hey, John, I want you to be a referee for the next show we're going to do. And I told him, I said, Jorge, I don't know how to referee. And he goes, no, he goes, you know everything that the guy should be doing. He says, you know how to fight, and you don't mind seeing people get hurt. And that was one of my qualifications was I don't mind seeing anyone get hurt. And so, you know, I thought about it, and because, you know, he was my friend, he was my instructor, I said, all right, I'll do it. And I looked at, you know, I had a friend say, you know, what are you going to do? You know, I said, what the hell am I going to do? I got two guys that are going to be inside a cage beating the hell out of each other. I'm going to wait for one to tap or the corner throwing the towel. I'm going to stop the fight. That's it. Right? And so, you know, the very first time I did it, the two competitors were a guy named Scott Morris and Sean Dougherty.
Yeah.
They were the first two out of UFC 2. And, you know, Sean Dougherty was this young kid, about 18, and he comes out to, you know, throw, you know, a couple of kicks, and Scott ends up taking him down. He mounts him, and he neck cranks him, and, you know, Dougherty taps out, and I stop the fight, and I go, well, that was easy. And then the next one is, you know, Pat Smith fights a guy named Ray Wizard, who I knew, and he ends up choking Ray Wizard, and just at the point he goes out, you know, I stop the fight, and I go, this is easy. This is no problem at all. And from that point, my life became a living hell. The things that were happening it was horrible. And I had guys that were getting knocked out, and I'm screaming at their corner to throw in the towel, and their corner doesn't throw the towel, and I'm not supposed to fight it, not supposed to stop it. You can watch, you know, Pat Smith when he fights Scott Morris, because those two had advanced. You know, Pat Smith actually thought that I was yelling at him to get off, and that's why he stopped, because I was yelling at Scott Morris's corner to throw the towel, and they looked at me, shook their head, and threw the towel into the audience, and I basically started yelling at them, you mother, and I started going after them. And so, thank God, Pat thought I was talking to him, and he stopped. But after that show, I had multiple times, you know, Remco Pardue knocks out Orlando Wheat with elbows, and I'm waiting for a corner to throw a towel because the fighter can't tap, and I wasn't supposed to stop it.
Yeah.
It was horrible. And afterwards, I said, I will never do that again. And you know, it was great. And I go, no, it's horrible. You're going to get somebody seriously hurt because I have people that are unconscious, and I have corners that have no idea about fighting. Someone's going to get really hurt doing this. You've got to give the referee the opportunity to stop the fight. And, you know, I told him, I said, I'm done. And he says, well, when would you want to stop the fight? And that's when I came up with, look, if the fighter cannot intelligently defend themselves, I need to stop the fight. If they're unconscious, they can't intelligently defend themselves. I'm going to stop it. If they're knocked, you know, loopy, and they're just taking shots, and the corner's not throwing the towel, I'm going to stop it. And so he looked and he said, okay, when the fighter can't intelligently defend himself, you can stop it. I said, okay, and that was my first thing that I got thrown in there, and from that point, you know, every show would have something that would occur, and I would start adding rules. And I would go to, Art Davey and Bob Meyerowitz until it was, past UFC 5, and then at UFC 6, I'd basically just go to Bob Meyerowitz and say, hey, you can't have this, When it came, UFC 6 occurs, and Tank Abbott's fighting Oleg Taktarov, and he's trying to stick his fingers in his mouth. And when I was a kid, my dad did that at a baseball game to somebody and ripped his face open. And so he told me that at the time, long ago, he told me that's fish hooking, don't do it. And so I see it, and I go, he's trying to fish hook him, and the only thing to do is to bite. You can't bite, so you can't fish hook, right? Okay, so no fish hooking. And so all these rules just started coming about when things would happen in fights, and we put it in there.
That's awesome. Do you know what? I'm going to go back and watch, because the Oleg got rear naked choke, didn't he, on Tank Abbott? Now think about it, I'm going to have to go back and watch that to look for that.
Go back and watch Tank try to stick his fingers in Oleg's mouth and try to separate his lips.
Oh, I'm going to have to watch that again, God, that's insane. That was the Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn clash, wasn't it? The fight where Ken
that was their super fight.
Yeah, that was super fight in that card, yeah. Do you know what? Do you know what the great thing? I love those cards, honestly. I'm getting a bit fanboyish here, going back, reminiscing. But for you, though, did you enjoy the sport itself, though? I
love the sport.
When you first watched the fights, did you enjoy it?
No, look at, when I started working out with Horion, the first person that I grappled with was Hoist, and I was go in there, and he says, "What do you want to do? Do you want to just we can roll, we can fight?" I go, "Well, let's roll." And so I'm on top of Hoist for a while, and I was probably about 300 pounds at the time, and he started talking to me while I was on top of him, and I was like, "Is this some little son of a bitch talking to me?" And eventually he armbarred me, and I said, "How did you do that?" And that was what caught me. I mean, it caught me, and it caught my attention of, I want to know how you pulled that off, because it was so cool, in my opinion. I was bitching. And so when I started working out with them, I just loved everything they did. And then I started watching fights that they had on tape from Brazil and different places. And then we started, there was people that would come in, and we would, stand there, and sometimes a student would fight, sometimes it would be one of the brothers that would fight. And so you got to see that. And I just love the more free form of open fighting where you could do anything. I grew up with boxing. I boxed until I was 17 years of age, and I loved boxing, but it was limited.
Yeah.
And when you brought in all these different elements, I just loved that, hey, there's no excuses here. Either you do or you don't. And so I fell in love with the whole open form of free fighting. And when it got to the point where finally they were going to have UFC 1, I was excited as hell, and I was bothered that other people weren't catching on to it and weren't picking it up and weren't understanding what was going to occur. And then when it finally happened, I had a friend who called me, and it was funny because he was a really tough guy, right? He goes, hey, he goes, I don't know if you've seen it, but I saw this show, and there's this skinny guy, Mexican guy, something like that. He goes, he says, you will kill him. He goes, we got to get you on the show, right? And I go, are you talking about that ultimate fighting thing, right? He goes, that's it, yes. And I said, oh, you're talking about Hoist Gracie? I said, that's the guy that I train with all the time. He goes, that's the guy, right? And so, it was, I loved the fighting. I loved the sport then. I love the sport now. I fell in love, several times in my life. My wife is one, and the sport of MMA is the other. I absolutely love everything that MMA does. I love the sport. There is, parts of it where people, talk all the time about, oh, it's brutal and this and that. No, it's not. If you understand it, I'm not saying it's not a violent sport. There's violence in it. There's violence in football, American football. There's violence in boxing. But, brutality is when you take somebody that can't fight and put them against somebody that can. That's brutal.
Yes.
When you talk about putting two skilled people together, it's competition.
Yes.
It's no different than people that want to, go to Wimbledon and play tennis. They're going there because they want to prove that they're the very best. They don't want to take a ball and hit it against a wall and say, look, I never miss. They want to go against another human being to say, I want to see what your skill level is compared to mine.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, not everyone gets it, not everyone is into fighting, and that's okay. But just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's bad.
No, it's not. I compete in MMA. I follow the sport. I love the sport. I'm the same as you. I feel it's a beautiful art, and it's for me. It's always going to be part of me. Looking into then the fights pre-Zuffa, I spoke to Mark. I've had Mark Goddard on before, and we spoke with him about refereeing, and I said it must be difficult at times when you're in there and you've got to be a referee, but at the same time you're watching an amazing fight go on. I've said to him, do you not at one moment stand there and go and watch and just forget that you're there sometimes? Like, was there any fights for you when you were reffing, that just were for you like, wow, you were just watching it going, I can't believe this is happening 3 feet away from me?
Oh, there's so many. I get asked, the questions I get asked all the time are, what's the best fight you've ever done? And it's like, I can't answer that. It's impossible. Yeah. I've done thousands and thousands of fights, and you want me to say that this one is the best of all of them when I've done ones that are just fantastic. So there's no way to pick out just one fight. But I get asked all the time, what's it like when you're inside? Did you ever just stand there and think, damn? And I said, all the time. All the time, and I'm standing there and I go, holy shit, this is awesome. Now, I don't say it out loud, but in my head, that's what I'm saying, because it's freaking awesome. What these guys are doing is so beautiful to me. The way they're going about competing, some of the techniques that they're using, and especially when you do it, you understand how good the skill level that they're using against each other and how they're mitigating each other's skill levels by their actual skill. It just is, it's poetry in motion to me. I absolutely love it, and it's the greatest form of competition I think there is in the world.
Oh yeah, when you got to think, you were stood there and you got to witness Gary Goodridge and Paul Herrera. That moment,
that was not good to witness. That was me screwing up.
Probably because you were stood there going, "Wow, that's happening."
Well, and you look at it, and it's I knew Gary before that fight. As far as I knew Gary as an arm wrestler because I used to compete in arm wrestling too, and Gary was really good. And back then I didn't have anybody that I could learn from. So really, it was a matter of me trying to figure things out on my own. Because I was the pariah, there was no boxing referee that wanted to try to help me, and it really wasn't the same sport, so I really wasn't going to him. And it was a trial and error, and that fight right there, I learned something from that fight that I used to this day. Is I had told myself going into that, look, Gary is an arm wrestler. He's a big, strong guy, and on his feet, maybe he can hurt Paul. But if Paul is a wrestler coming out of Nebraska, and if he gets it to the ground, Gary's going to start to have problems. And as Paul shoots in and he puts his arm for a single, and I think he's going to drive him a certain way, so I start walking to where I think they're going to fall, and all of a sudden Gary hooks the arm and goes back and has a crucifix, and I was slow to react because I kind of did exactly what you're talking about. I went, whoa, and I started to watch because it didn't go the way I had told myself it was going to go. And then he launches into the elbows, and I was slow getting around to stop it because I was becoming a spectator because I had told myself what was going to happen, and it didn't. And so I was slow in stopping that fight, and I hate that fight. Good fight for Gary, though. Great fight for Gary, bad fight for Paul and for John.
The thing was, they were fast. It wasn't like he was throwing one and then there was a pause. It was like a barrage, literally he put the weapon on automatic, and just those elbows, there was no gap.
They were coming.
They were fast. You will feel a bit aggrieved by the fact that you weren't quick enough. There was no gaps between those elbows. He was throwing them fast and hard, and I think if you were stood over there, you would have you still probably feel the same way. It was insane, that moment. That's one of the moments that even to this day I keep. It sticks in my mind for always, there's again, like the Vito Belfort and Vanderlei, that moment as well. It's just, there's handfuls of moments that just stick in my mind. And but look, John, you've been around and you've been looking after the sport. I feel like you've taken care of the sport, and you've been there from there to now. Did you ever think then? I've spoke to like Sean Wheelock as well. I've spoke to everyone else before. I've asked this. Did you ever think then, like let's say with the jiu-jitsu, that MMA would be in your life today?
You know what? It's hard for me to say. I always believed in the sport because I loved it. Now, I tell people all the time, did I ever imagine that I would be doing fights in front of 55,000 people? No, never. Okay, did I ever think that the sport would get to the level that it actually is now? No, I never saw it getting to the level that it is now. I always believed in it, but you know, things were so different back then that it was a matter of, if you were on the inside, you realized how close it was to it shutting down after every show.
Yeah.
Every show there was something, and you were wondering, is there going to be another? And that was what I was always worried about. So, yeah, I didn't have the luxury of saying, hey, this is great. You know, it was a matter of, oh my God, where am I going now? Which court is going to try to, make me look bad? What do I have to study so I can sit here and turn this around on them, and so we don't look stupid, we look smart. And it was that game of, I always told everyone, I wish I had a crystal ball, so it would tell me exactly what was going to happen, because it was always, I was always in almost the glass was half empty mode instead of it being half full.
Well, look, I will say right now, John, I am so happy that you've been involved in the sport and what you've done. You know, like you said, there's stuff that you've done in the background that people probably would never have known, and they may not know how much you've done exactly. Even I don't know everything that you've done, but I am thankful for everything you have done into the sport, and the fact that there's people like yourself and that we needed then, and we still need now, that have helped it evolve to where we are right now. And it's, in the 2016, it wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for the likes of yourselves putting the effort in and the time that you did. And that's why I've got yous all on, because I feel that people like yourselves putting that bit of time and effort in, it made a difference, and it made everything kind of happen to where we are now.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And now when you look back, you go, yeah, it made a difference. At the time, you're thinking, oh my God, I can't make a difference here. And, you just never know. And it's a matter of, hey, all I know is you got to get up in the morning and you got to start walking forward, and you got to work hard. And if people are trying to get in your way, no matter what it is, it's your responsibility to not let them stop you. And that was the attitude that we had back then. And it's, I have a different attitude now. But it still works out in the same way. When you talk about certain referees, what's done in the sport, it's still, this is a young sport, and we do have guys, Mark Goddard, he now is a personal friend of mine, and I love Mark.
Yeah.
And what I love about Mark is Mark cares.
Yeah.
And Mark doesn't. You get a lot of guys that they want to be part of the sport because they want to be somebody. And that's the one thing that drives me crazy. If you're in this for the wrong reason, I'm not a fan of yours and I don't like you.
Yeah.
But if you're someone like a Mark Goddard, Mark's got it. He's got it down. He understands what's important. He cares about the fighters. He cares about doing the right thing, because doing the right thing sometimes isn't popular. And you look at, he just had a fight that he did, in Australia, and he had, Frank Mir against Mark Hunt.
Yeah,
beautiful. And right away, when Mark went and stopped that fight, but the way he stopped it told me, as soon as I saw it, I said, he made a good stop, because he didn't come rushing in and just throw Mark Hunt off to the side. Mark was kind of doing his walk-off, but Mark Goddard still did exactly what we would want a referee to do. He comes in and he's looking at Frank Mir. And I can't tell you how many times, and there's, one of the most famous ones I had that people, hated me for, and it was okay. I had Paul Daly fighting Nick Diaz in Strikeforce, and it was one of the greatest first rounds you've ever seen.
Yeah. Wow.
Loved that fight.
Yeah.
And there came a point where Paul gets hit to the body, and I hear all the air go out of him. But instead of backing off, he goes after Nick. And, just the balls that guy had to do what he did at that moment. And Nick ends up hitting him with a shot. It hurts him, and he does a wobble over and he falls. And Nick comes over the top of him, and I'm going to let him go. He's still trying to defend himself, and Nick hits him with one right hand with about 2 seconds left in the round. And Paul is looking straight up at Nick with his right eye, and his left eye is doing a left-hand turn. And I stopped the fight because, look, he can't intelligently defend himself. I don't want him to get hit with another shot that hurts him to the point he doesn't leave the ring the right way.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what you see Mark Goddard doing. When Mark comes in and looks at Frank Mir, he's looking down at it, and then all of a sudden his head comes up and his hands are going over his head, waving the fight off. And I know what Mark was looking at because I've seen it too many times. But no one else knows. And they all think, oh, he stopped that too soon. Frank was fine. He had fallen back. He could have defended himself. He was in a position to defend himself, and pull, hunt into guard. You hear all these stories. And it's like, you have no clue. God bless Mark Goddard for doing the right thing and protecting Frank Mir when Frank Mir was unable to protect himself if Mark Hunt had gone after him.
Yeah, Mark Hunt on top, just throwing. It's not a good place.
That's not a pretty picture if you're the guy that he's throwing at.
and that's the thing people don't understand. Like you said, especially because Mark's competed as well, and I think that does play a factor in with some of the referees these days. It does help. Like I know Herb Dean had done some amateur stuff as well, and I think it makes a difference. For example, I've spoken to Mark Goddard before, and I said to him, I don't know if I could do the reffing thing. I maybe could look to do the judging. I've had a guy called Ben Cartledge who does judging with the UFC, and I love the work that Ben and Mark are doing. They're working with the UK MMAF and in general the IMMAF, and they go around Europe and they help educate the referees. They do seminars for refereeing and judging, and we get them on to try and get that out there to people because I think it's huge. I think if we can help develop that side of it, it just makes
it is
massive
huge.
difference.
And here's the thing that most people don't realize. When I teach a class, or now when Mark Goddard is going and teaching for IMAF, all those classes that he's teaching, what's he doing? He's helping guys to not make the mistakes that he has made in the past.
Yeah.
He's helping guys to learn a way of getting past those mistakes without having to make them by learning from a guy that has made them. But he's also teaching people how to do a job that if he's not the one doing it, they're taking his job. So he's teaching people how to take his job. But he's doing it because that's what's right for the sport. That's what's right for MMA. We need to have more educated, knowledgeable, and better trained officials because that's what the sport needs. And it's not about Mark Goddard. It's not about John McCarthy. It's about the sport.
Yeah.
We're not going to be there forever, and we want this sport to go forward. So the best way to do that is to have officials that are trained, that know what they're doing, and know when to let a fight go and know when to stop the fight so that the fighters are protected when they can't protect themselves.
And that's why the work that you're doing, obviously stateside, and then the work that Mark's doing across the pond, UK, Europe-wise, it will have an effect. Obviously, it just takes a bit of time for it to knock on and have a knock-on effect. And for it to... I've said it before, I said fighters will feel a lot more at ease when they know the referee is of that caliber. They say, oh, he's trained, he's been doing seminars with Mark Goddard, Big John McCarthy, etc. It does help, I think, put a fighter's mind at ease when they got confidence in the referee because they know they're safe. It sounds like we said before, it is a violent sport, but at the same time they're safe. They know they're safe when they go in. They know that they'll come out safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. You hear a lot of people talk about the sport, and they're sitting there and they say, "I'm willing to die." That's awesome. I'm not going to let you die.
Nope.
Won't let that happen, okay? It's not going to go that far. I tell guys all the time, hey, I will let you swim into very deep waters, but I am not going to let you drown. And that's, as the fighter, I love the fact that they have that, I will go to the very end. That's their job. And they've got to have that type of attitude. But the thing to look at, and Mark Goddard is getting to that point now, he's getting older, and I am older. And I know that, the way I looked at life when I was 25 and 30 is different than the way I look at life now that I'm 53. And the things that I did in the past, I now pay for. You know, and it's easy when you're young to sit there and say, just let me go. But you will pay for the things that we let go. If we don't protect you at a certain point, you're going to pay for them. You may pay for them very close in that future, or you may pay for them later on down the road. But I guarantee there's that price. It's going to be collected. And that's our job, is to make sure that you don't suffer some of the things that have occurred. You look at a Gary Goodrich, and, you know, I love Gary.
Yeah.
And he fought for so long, but the fights that he did, especially in K1, and, you know, the head trauma that Gary took, he's paying for that now.
Yeah.
And these are the things that we want to protect fighters from, because you have your competitive life, but you have a long life after that competitive life is over, and you don't want it altered to the point where you can't live a normal life and take care of your kids and watch them grow and be a part of them growing up. That's all important stuff to the official. The fighter wants to, you know, go out there and, you know, let them go to the very end, and we're going to let them go as far as we can, but we do care about that person and them being able to live their life the way it's supposed to be lived long after they're not fighting anymore.
Yeah, the fighter looks at the 15 minutes they've got ahead of them, but you look at the big picture.
That's it. And, you know, and it's not easy. It's not easy for fans to understand. But, you know, when I'm teaching, you know, when I talk to Mark Goddard, when I'm teaching, you know, referees or other officials, you know, I try to explain to them, look, you need to understand, nobody is going to live with this fight. If you let things go too far, besides that fighter that you let go to the point where they should have been taken out of this, they're not fighting, they're surviving, and they're not even surviving well. So if we'll say that fighter, you know, gets hurt to the point they can never compete again, is the fighter going to have to deal with that? Yes, they are. And you as the referee are going to have to deal with it, because you're responsible. Nobody in that arena, not one fan, if you have a fight that goes too long and that fighter ends up dying, they end up not making it out of that fight, or not being able to make it back home after a certain time, and they pass, everybody that's in that arena is going to say, oh, I knew he should have stopped it. But none of them have to live with it. But every time that you look in the mirror, you'll know, I could have done something different. I should have stopped it, and I didn't. And you are responsible for it. And, you know, you've got to live with it. And that is not an easy thing to do.
And that's why exactly you're doing the work that you do to basically reduce the chances of that happening. And
that's it.
Yeah, that's all it is. Just knocking those, you know, the probability down. And I think you guys are doing a great job. Honestly, I love the fact that these courses go on all the time, and I am literally, at the moment, I'm tied up myself with the military. I've got stuff with the military I'm doing, but I am going to do these courses in time when I've got a little bit more free time when I'm outside of it.
Outstanding.
Just to educate myself, really. It's more educational, and also, you know, I hope to maybe, you know, do a little bit as well, you know, and if I can, it'd be great. It's just something I can, for personal use and for future reference, when you know, people want to ask questions or anyone's curious, it'd be nice to have the answer.
It is. It's so funny how many people you sit there and they'll tell me, oh, this is what the rule means. Really? Did you write it? No, I did. Okay, so, you know, it's so funny when people sit there and tell me, no, this is what it is. No, it's not.
No.
And every rule is something that, you know, you can look at the written word, but there's a meaning behind all of it. And luckily I was there for the making of just about all of them, or the making of the unified rules, and I know what was supposed to be. And it's a matter of, that's helped me along the way. And I always try to get everyone to understand, this is what you're doing. Now, the fans don't know. Fans are, you know, they're going to read something, or they're told something and they believe it's true, and they're going to sit there and think the referee's wrong about doing something, and that's okay. Don't worry about the fans. You worry about doing what's right for the fighters. Your job is to protect them. That's our number one thing. The safety of the fighter is number one, and then the enforcement of the rules of the sport is the second one. And if you're doing those two things right, then you're doing a good job.
And you've done a great job, and you're still doing a great job in the fact that you're doing stuff outside of the refereeing within the cage. I'm not going to keep you any longer than I should, by the way, because I am not going to be greedy. I'm going to let you get back to your family. I'm going to let you shoot off. I feel like I've taken you too long anyway, but before I let you go, can you let people know how they can, because you're very active on Twitter, I know that myself, but can you let people know how they can contact you, maybe like on social media, to like join you with Twitter, if they've got any other stuff they can, interact with you, like stuff like that?
Yeah, if they want to ask questions on Twitter, and mine is John McCarthy MMA, at John McCarthy MMA. They can ask questions. Normally, if it's a decent question, I'll answer it. I get a lot of crazy ones sometimes, but sometimes I'll answer those. But I try to answer things just to help educate fans on what the rules of the sport are, what should be done, why it should be done, so there is more clarity in the sport and people understand it more. So that's what I do on Twitter. If they ever want to be a referee, they can go to MMAreferee.com. I hold courses. Not very often because I just don't have time for them, but I'm going to have one coming up here probably by the middle of summer and stuff. So if you want to think about being a judge or a referee, go to MMAreferee.com. That'll be a way of getting at least information about it. I would tell you, if you haven't been part of the sport and you haven't been training, get to a gym, start doing all of that, start learning everything that fighters are doing, all the different holds, all the different takedowns, everything that they're doing in a fight before you go to anybody's class, because especially if you come to mine, you're going to fail if you don't know those things. So, if you decide that you want to come, you can put your name on the email list and we will notify you when there is a class coming up.
And you also do a podcast with Sean Wheelock, so...
I forgot about this. Thank you very much. I got a podcast, that again you can, listen to and get information on MMA. We talk about all kinds of things that are a little bit different than most of them. But the podcast is Let's Get It On with, me and Sean Wheelock. I think you can go to, I think it's www.podcastmma.com is the link for it. So
I will put the link
check
up.
out the podcast.
I will put the link up on the description for the for the podcast and for the MMA course if people want to jump on and obviously get the name put on down in the emails. Because Sean Wheelock's part of the commission as well, which is quite an interesting angle from it as well. You see, because he gives that good kind of, and also his knowledge and experience is great. I love speaking to Sean. I've had him on a few times now. He's great. And then last but not least, do you want to give I've said thank you, but do you want to give thanks to anyone that have helped you out with your career and with your refereeing?
No, you know what? As far as the only people I usually thank, I thank the fighters for what they do, and I thank the fans for just being so fantastic and supporting the sport. Because if it wasn't for the fans, we wouldn't have the sport, and that's from the very beginning. The fans kept it alive, and the fans have made it what it is. Their interest in the sport, their supporting of the fighters, their supporting of the different organizations that are out there. You know what? Be a fan of MMA. That's one thing. The UFC is the top one. They're the big dogs. Love them. I love that. But support all of them. All of the different ones. Bellator, World Series of Fighting, Cage Rage, all the different organizations that are out there. Support the fighters that are in those because they deserve it.
They do, and hey, look, John Jones, for example, Daniel Cormier, let's go, Dimitri. Everyone started somewhere. They didn't all start in the
a small show.
You got to start. So follow people now, and you might see them up in the big star, and you can say, "Look, I remember him when he first started. He was awful, and now he's doing pretty well."
That's true.
I agree. I push the regional stuff out for people to go and watch it, even if there's there's no UFC on in the evening, on a weekend, for example. Go and watch a regional show. Get yourself out there a bit more. But look, ladies and gentlemen, Big John McCarthy, thank you very much again. It's been an absolute pleasure having your time.